By way of introduction, I'm the finance director for the city of Oshkosh. I've been with the city for about 4 or 5 years, but I have about 40 years of local government experience, and I've had a experience of being a finance director, city administrator, a village manager, city manager, and went into retirement, but came out of retirement to help the city of Oshkosh out. So the issue that we're talking about this evening is how do we replace special assessments? Oshkosh, like a number of communities in the state of Wisconsin, has special assessments, and special assessments are used to help pay for special services that benefit a particular property. Normally those special assessments are levied on a linear foot basis. In a typical situation, when we do street reconstruction, the people on one side of the street will pay about a third of the cost. The people on the other side of the street will pay about a third of the cost. And then a third of the cost is borne by the city through the issuance of general obligation debt. So over the last couple of years, our special assessments have been going up quite dramatically, and I'm going to show you that in the next slide in just a little bit. And this is causing a huge impact on homes, particularly homes in our central city area, where those costs continue to increase. And because of that, the city council asked staff to take a look at, what are some alternatives to replace the use of special assessments. And we're going to just talk about that a little bit this evening and then answer your questions. So the driving force on this, from a staff perspective and a city council perspective, is the cost of paving streets. Now, the pavement on the streets, and before I go much further, because I see some people reaching for their phones, this presentation is on our city website. I'll give you the address at the end of the presentation. You can certainly free to take pictures, take notes, but this presentation's available, and I believe is being recorded for information purposes as well. So getting back to it, back in 2008, the cost of a 60-foot frontage, a typical house, 60 feet frontage, on a 32-foot wide street would cost a homeowner about $33.60 per household. That would be an assessment. And you can see the escalating bars till we get to 23, and that cost is now almost $7,500. So it's gone up dramatically with the cost, not only inflation, but the cost of construction materials and labor and those type of things. So that cost is getting really high. Some assessments in some of our areas, Mark, I think are approaching 10, maybe even we've had some assessments at $20,000, because not only are we assessing the streets, but we're assessing the lateral portions of the water main that's underneath the street and the sewer lateral that's underneath the street. So that's a combined assessment, and we're going to talk about how that's going to differentiate in this new program. I don't know if you got any other questions or comments on that.
Well, I think, the footnote there, it's based on a 60-foot frontage. So if you live in an older area of town, it may be 60 feet, maybe less too, but we know that as time has gone on, the size of the lots has grown. So what we anticipate happening is not only is inflation going to catch up with you, because that slide demonstrated that inflation has resulted in that because we used it based on a 60-foot home. But if you have a home that's, say, 80 feet or 100 feet, and if you progressively go further out in the city, you'll see larger lots just like I've described. And you're increasing that even more so because it'll then be based on that 80 feet or 100 feet of frontage. So you can take that number and effectively increase it. So the costs aren't getting any cheaper. Cost of construction, in particular the last few years, has, as you can see, has dramatically increased. For 5 years, it didn't go up much, but over the last 10 years, it's easily doubled. So you can get an idea that this is causing a burden on property owners, which is why the city council asked us to take a look at this. So we're just we're summarizing a lot of what we already reported to council.
Correct. What we're presenting to city council in the month of February is kind of a combination approach to supplement or replace that funding. So we're looking at two different mechanisms, and we've talked about a number of different mechanisms, some that were considered and some that weren't. We might have remembered we talked about a transportation utility. For various reasons, we've decided not to continue with that approach. But tonight, and what we're presenting to council is a combination of doing a vehicle registration fee and some transfers from the utilities. And let me explain why we're looking at this combination approach. To begin with, we're looking at a total estimated annual amount needed for road construction and sidewalk construction of about $3.75 million.
And that's the part that's currently special assessed. The city picks up the rest of it, but that's the part that goes directly to charge to you as a property owner right now.
Great. So the vehicle registration fee, what we're proposing the city council to consider is $35 per vehicle. And we'll talk about the how that works and functions in a little bit. But basically, $35, and we have about 46,000 vehicles that are registered in the city of Oshkosh, would generate about $1.5 million. And then we would take $750,000 from each of the three utilities, that being water, sanitary sewer, and stormwater, and put that into a separate fund. So we would take all of those funding sources and put them into one pot. So if you're looking at kind of a share of the pie, the vehicle registrations are just a little bit over 40%, and the transfer from utilities is just under 60%. So it's like a 60-40 split. So that's the mechanism. Together, those two pieces of the pie would supplement or replace what we currently were doing for special assessments.
This, just a little brief explanation, why was $750,000 chosen? The Public Service Commission regulates water utilities, but they also keep an eye on other utilities. And they've determined that and many municipalities charge their utilities for a portion of road reconstruction if they're doing utility improvements at the same time. When we redo a water main, for example, you don't get special assessed for the water main. You may get assessed for a new lateral, but you don't get assessed for the water main because you're already paying that as part of your monthly utility charge. The $750 recognizes that on average, it's about an 8-foot trench that is needed to excavate a trench for water or any of the utilities. So that's why we use that. That's how much it would cost us to pay for an 8-foot trench for each of the utilities that we would be replacing. So it wasn't an arbitrary number. We rounded it to that number, but that was based on actual experience that we've had of the cost to excavate an 8-foot trench. So that's where the methodology that was used to come up with that number.
Okay, getting back to the slides. Let's see, once here, let's move this forward. So just talking about the mechanics of the vehicle registration fee. The vehicle registration fee, the use of that is actually set up by state statutes. And I'll talk about how many communities use that in just a quick minute. But it has to be used for transportation purposes. The definition of transportation purposes in the statute's pretty vague, pretty wide open, but it can't be used for things outside of transportation. So it can't be used for police service, it can't be used for fire service, but it can be used for other transportation-related activities. So the City Council is considering using this fee to help augment and replace special assessments. The state would add that annual registration fee to your statement when you go to renew your license plates. So you'd make that payment to the state of Wisconsin. The state of Wisconsin then would turn over a check to the city of Oshkosh for our vehicles.
Yeah, and so if you ever notice with your vehicle registration fee, it says vehicle kept in County of Winnebago, City of Oshkosh. The reason it's on there is so that if that either the county or the city implemented a vehicle registration fee, they would know that that's where the vehicle is. So this would have some meaning now. Right now, it doesn't have any meaning because there's no fee, but that's how it would be determined based on their database that says your vehicle is kept here in the city of Oshkosh.
So this registration fee would be for vehicles up to 8,000 pounds, and the 8,000 pound limit is actually dictated by state statutes. So trucks over 8,000 pounds are exempt, so larger vehicles are exempt.
And I would just like to parenthetically state, I probably feel pretty confident, I'm speaking for most, if not every single council member, that is not something that is very appealing about this fee, but we don't make that rule. The history, and I'm old enough to have a little bit of history in my mind, one of the first cities in the state to do this was Beloit. The idea was that they were going to get those wily students from Beloit College to pay this fee. In reality, and they said they topped it out at 8,000 pounds because that was about, as big about those big 1960s vehicles would get about 8,000 pounds, but it effectively exempts any large vehicles. And as you all well know, the larger vehicles cause the most damage. Because of the volume of vehicles, we need wide roads, but trucks need wide lanes, but they also need deep pavement. So it's an imperfection in this, but that's why we're not just relying on the vehicle registration fee, because for all the flaws it has, it does have an effective way of collecting fees on volume of vehicles. But if somebody has an argument against it, I'm already with you on portions of it. But it was something that we don't have a say in how to change that. That would be done at the state legislature, and they haven't changed this law in about 60 years.
Yeah, so based on that registration information, when you fill out your renewals, the state of Wisconsin is telling us we have 46,772 vehicles that would qualify for the VRF fee that are set up with the city of Oshkosh. And to get the funding that we need, we were looking at $35 per vehicle to do that. So how does that compare? Maybe just a little bit of history first. Vehicle registration fees in Wisconsin, about 10, 15, 20 years ago, that was probably about 10. We're now up to 38 municipalities, and they have different dollar amounts. They range from anywhere from $10 vehicle registration fee to $40. Again, we're proposing 35. 8 of those communities are in northeastern Wisconsin: Appleton, Green Bay, Bellevue, Chilton, Kaukauna are all in that. In addition to municipalities doing this fee, counties can also add this fee. There are 13 counties that have a vehicle registration fee. In the counties right now, that ranges from $10 to $30. There are some communities that have a municipal registration and a county. I know that there are communities, for example, the city of Milwaukee has a municipal registration fee, and Milwaukee County has a municipal vehicle registration fee. But right now, we're just talking about one for the city of Oshkosh. And
I don't think any county in northeast Wisconsin has one. So
no.
This is still, even though the law is 60 years old, it hasn't been used widely. In the past years, it's been increasing.
And then if you look at other comparables to Oshkosh here, the comparable cities from the city of Appleton, city of Sheboygan, with Janesville being at $40 and Kaukauna being at $10. So our $35 is on the upper end of that, but that's what we need to help provide the funding, that $3.75 million that I talked about that we were levying as special assessment. This is just that 40% of that funding.
And I will point out, both Appleton and Green Bay, their fee is relatively new. It's been within the last 10 years. And in each of those cases, it was done specifically for special assessment relief. But one of a good question would be, well, why is theirs 20 and ours is 35? They've both recognized that that's not sufficient to raise their funds, and they're looking at alternatives. to the vehicle registration fee to either supplement it or replace it. So that's part of the reason we're doing the combination, because we know that to raise $3.75 million would be a vehicle registration fee that frankly would just be unacceptable to the public. And I think if you can do the math, you'd have to increase it by 2.5 times, and that'd be higher than any place else, and we didn't want to do that.
Okay, so in addition to the vehicle registration fee, we're also talking about, as we mentioned earlier, taking money from the utilities. And so we would take that and roll that $750,000 into our budget. And again, it's necessary to restore or replace the portion of the road that's above the trenches for the utilities themselves. So if we put that in the budget with our utilities, it'll have an impact on our utility rates. The city of Oshkosh each year does a 10-year projection, cash flow analysis of our utilities. So we look at what future rate increases might be necessary, not only for the operation of the utilities, but also for future utility projects. It's a kind of a complicated formula when we look at that. We look at, how much of the money is going to repay previously issued debt that we borrowed for. We also look at how much we need to cover our operating costs. And then we also look at what do we need for cash for future projects. We're trying to reduce the amount of debt that we issue, and we've done a pretty good job at doing that. So we're estimating that the annual increase to help with this supplemental funding for streets to increase anywhere from 1/4% to 0.5%. So on a $100 monthly bill for water, sewer, and stormwater, it would mean about 25 or 50 cents per month additional to generate the $750,000 that's needed to help make that transfer. Now, the city council's already looked at the budgets for the utilities. We have decided that our stormwater utility did not need an adjustment this year, but people that do receive their utility bills will note that I think February 1st we started with a sewer rate increase. That was 6.75%. If we go to this route, we would have to up that by another quarter, so we would have to do another 25% adjustment to the sewer rates. That would make that
0.25%.
0.25.
0.25.
Quarter of 1%. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's why I'm here.
So that would make it a 7% sewer rate increase. So we would have to come back. The city council would have to adopt another 0.25 of 1% to the utility for the sanitary sewer. The water rates, to be honest, we've presented information to the city council at budget time, but we're probably looking at a water rate filing in 2025. We have been working on a number of different projects with our treatment facility and all of the backbone of getting safe water to all of our residents. We'll have to have a water rate increase in 2025. The extent of that has to go through the Public Service Commission to get that adjusted. So it's too early to project what that might be for the water side of things.
Because we're regulated by the Public Service Commission, that wouldn't kick in immediately. We're just trying to give you an idea of what it would cost you in that.
So the items that would be covered with this funding would be for road and street reconstruction, would be paid with this new funding. We're also going to tap into sidewalk rehabilitation in this fund as well. So that's what's going to be included.
And you may recall that about every 10 years, we get around to each neighborhood to take a look at sidewalks. So those ones would be eliminated, where somebody comes out and sprays your sidewalk, and you see that. We'll still be spraying because we want to identify which ones are going to get done for estimating purposes, but it wouldn't be to charge you anymore. The idea was we would eliminate those. Quite frankly, staff very much likes that idea because the volume of special assessments or special charges for sidewalks. We do about 2,000 separate bills a year for sidewalk assessments, and that's a pretty, a pretty good amount of work. So the idea would be to eliminate those, and that would also, every 10 years you get hit up for 2-3 sidewalk squares, maybe something like that. Those would be eliminated as well.
And that whole process is pretty labor intensive, where we send out somebody from our Public Works Department to inspect the sidewalk, to mark the sidewalk. There's then discussion of, is that sidewalk square going to be replaced or not? Then there's also the staff time to create the bills, generate the bills, and those type of things. So it's a lot of labor work to that. It's important to understand that not all special assessments are going to go away. We're talking about the special assessments for street reconstruction. There are still going to be special assessments for utilities, especially when those utilities are being extended into new areas. So if a new sanitary sewer is going in to serve an annexed area of the city that just came into the city, or extending a sewer where we don't have sewer now, we will still have special assessments in those cases. Same with water mains, either the developer or a special assessment when that water main is extended into new areas. There's also will be assessments for some of the lateral work. That's not going to go away under this formula. So it's important to understand there still will be special assessments, but it'll only be utility-related special assessments, not street-related or sidewalk-related special assessments.
So the road reconstruction projects that we're doing Wagoo in 2024. We'll be replacing the water laterals there because we know they're pretty old. And that generally costs between $1,500 and $2,500. Those are not going away. And that some of that's based on Public Service Commission regulations, because that improvement, that lateral, specifically benefits that individual property, and the utility, according to Public Service Commission rules, shouldn't pick that up. And so we apply that same principle to sanitary sewer and storm sewer laterals. So those are the ones that can't go away, but the water main, you're not paying for anyway directly, you're paying for it indirectly through your monthly charges.
Correct. So how would this come into effect? We're, again, presenting this to the City Council during the month of February. It'll be an ordinance change. With any ordinance, there's 2 readings. So there'll be a first reading at the first meeting in February, a second reading at the second meeting of February. If all goes well, that would be passed if that's the decision of the City Council. But we have to give the Department of Transportation 90 days notice to put the vehicle registration fee in place. So the vehicle registration fees, that 90 days gets us into June. We're looking at an implementation of July 1 for this to take place. Just gives us a little bit of leeway in getting all of the paperwork and documentation. So basically the first year, we may or may not get half of the funding. I don't have that 46,000 vehicles. We don't know when your registration comes up. Some people, the registration comes up in February. Some might come up in August or September. You won't get it, that new $35 until after July 1, because that'll be the effective date. So if you already submitted your vehicle registration information in 2024, you won't have it on your vehicle registration card that you get from the Department of Motor Vehicle. You'll get it after July 1. So with that, we had to do some more internal planning on some of the projects we're borrowing for, but we did take into account the fact that this fund would be created for half of the year in 2024 and then covered going forward.
And as the slide says, the special assessment relief itself will take effect for projects that begin on or after January 1, 2024. And that's another one of the rubs, the downsides, is how and when you implement this. And Russ and I have both been in local government for 40 years now. If we could figure out a way to go back retroactively, we would have suggested it. But that would merely carry on. Think we're trying to raise 3.75 million, excuse me. we would have to collect $3.75 million for each successive year we go back, which what would that do to utility rates? What would that do to a vehicle registration fee? Most cities, I shouldn't say most cities, all cities have recognized that they need to have a cutoff date, and the cutoff date we've recommended is January 1, 2024. So unfortunately, if you had a project done last year, you're still going to pay that special assessment. There is no magical way to go back. I wish there was, but there really isn't. But I can tell you that the people who have been coming in recent years, as these costs have been rising, I think that's what we're trying to address is people looking forward. So it would take effect this year, but if you are here to tell me that you had a project last year and you're going to be special assessed, I have the unfortunate duty to tell you that will still apply, and I understand that, and I think the council does it well, but we have to pick a cutoff time. So I figured I'd deliver that news because somebody's got to do it to you.
So getting back to the presentation again, Mark just covered this. It's not looking back to things that have happened. The hard part from an administration standpoint is if you cover people going back 1 year, what about people that were back 2 years? If you do 2 years, what about 3? And again, it's a matter of coming with the funding that's necessary to do that, and that would make that number pretty large. Also, on some special assessments, people have the option of paying it off right away. Properties that change hands usually take care of that at closing time. So there's a number of properties where they've already paid the entire amount, and there are some people that have elected to take installment portions. Those that are still on the installment plan will continue to be on the installment plan. So this new approach is to really look forward-looking, looking at how do we fund this going forward. So it's we've had a lot of discussion from a staff perspective of trying to look back, and we couldn't come up with a way of looking back that seemed to be fair for everybody involved. So we thought the best approach was to present a plan to City Council in going forward. So that's the key of our presentation this evening. To help collect information for the City Council, we've created VRF comments at oshkoshwi.gov. That email address is up and running. Some people have already submitted some comments. We have incorporated that into these frequently asked questions. We have hard copies for you. We also have a link of the presentation and this FAQ at the hot topics or the front page at wisconsinwi.gov. It's the first page when you call it up, and click on that. If you don't want to raise a question or comment tonight, you certainly have the ability to do that, and we'll get back to you as time permits. But that's really what we wanted to outline and present to you this evening. I think what we do is have some time for questions.
Yeah. So
if you're going to ask questions, I think we're going to ask Mike, because this is being recorded, and he's going to come around. But if there's no questions, that's fine. But if you got questions, we certainly would encourage you to ask them this evening.
So just raise your hand, and Andy will come over and give you the opportunity to get that question. And again, if you ask a question that we haven't picked up on, we'll be happy to look at adding it to our frequently asked questions. So yes, ma'am.
I have like 6, so.
That's okay.
I'll keep you busy. This is probably a stupid question. Is that vehicle registration fee what they're also calling a wheel tax? Is that the same thing?
That's the nickname for it. Yes, it's referred to as a wheel tax, but in the statute, it's a vehicle registration fee.
Thank you. I thought that, but, okay. I kind of was wondering how much debt the city's carrying for special assessments in the past. Can you tell me, like, the people who are paying their 15 years, some of them only have a year left? I mean, there's a lot of, you know that figure?
I have to admit that I have not pulled that information together. We do look at our outstanding debt because that's an important metric that the City Council likes to look at budget time every year. I can tell you, when I first came on board with the City of Oshkosh, The state gives us a limit of how much debt we can have, and that's 5% of our equalized value. 5.5, yeah, it's 5%.
5%, yep.
And we take a ratio of that. And when I started, we were in the upper 60s, 69. And for a while, the city of Oshkosh was actually over 70% of our legal debt limit. Our long-range finance committee has looked at debt management as a policy. Our goal right now is to get that legal debt limit ratio down to 40%. We're currently in that 48%. Our goal was at one point to get it to 50. Since we got it down to 50, we're trying to get it down to less than 40. So City Council is taking a pretty active role in reviewing our overall debt, our general obligation debt. In addition to that, we also have utility debt for the enterprise or our utility funds. That's not included in that debt ratio. But to segregate how much of that is special assessments would be kind of a hard task to do, but it's possible. The only other comment I would tell you is probably in the first 2 or 3 years I was here, our accounting for special assessments was so tight that the city actually had to borrow for special assessments to help carry those costs. Since we've gotten some repayments, and especially as properties have changed hands and have gotten prepayments on assessments, our special assessment fund is actually in a fairly good position. So the last 2 years, the city council has not had to issue debt for special assessments. So to answer your question, I don't have the number for you, and it'd be pretty hard to get because we've had some combination of borrowing for special assessments and not borrowing for special assessments.
You see debt differently that the public owes you compared to debt you might owe for street repair that you just assumed the debt for?
No, we look at debt as how much of our taxes have to go towards paying off debt. And so each year we look at how much we have to levy to make basically our mortgage payment, our house payment with principal and interest payments. And so we try to stay within that metric that I talked about as far as the percent of the legal debt limit. And the lower that number gets, the better off we'll be as a financial position. But you know, the segregating how much of that is special assessment versus how much of that is for equipment and other projects would be very tough to do, and I don't have that number. I apologize.
But if you figure this is where a finance director is not going to give you a direct answer if they don't know the exact answer. I will spitball it for you, but it's not going to be totally accurate. Of the 3.375 that we assess on an annual basis, 3.75. See, that's why he corrects me. But of that 3.75, almost half of the people paid in full right out of the gate. That varies from year to year. Everybody's financial situation is different. So we have to finance that through, it's become a fund to itself. It's almost become like a mini bank where the people who have paid in the past have enough put into the fund that the amount we loan out kind of replaced itself. But a few years we had to borrow a little more, and we were ramping up some of our street projects. So if you figure that's, let's just say round it to $2 million annually, $10 million is probably no more than $20 million. But again, great question. So I'm going to spitball it in for you, and Russ will then correct me tomorrow after he takes a look at what he can give a real answer.
No, I don't know about that. But the number we gave you at the beginning of the presentation at 3.75, that's our estimated need to replace special assessments going forward at today's cost. That could change 2 or 3 years down the road, but we think we have a good estimate of how much we have been assessing property owners in the past. So I'm fairly confident that 3.75 is our target and how much we have to generate, and that's what we've premised all of our assumptions around. So 3.75 on average is how much each year we do in special assessments. Some is a little bit more, some's a little bit less. It depends on the roads we do and the length of the roads that we do.
Okay, I'm curious as to if you can stop interest payments. I just think that's wrong to charge interest in addition to them having to pay for the special assessment and then to have to pay interest. I'm not sure the city should be making money.
Yeah. And that's another policy that our long-range finance committee has provided input to our city council. And we have adjusted that based on market conditions because our goal, as you said, is not to make money. But at the same time, that interest goes to help offset some of the administrative costs of doing the billing. So when we do a special assessment, we send out bills. We collect bills. If people don't pay or choose to go on installments, then we have an administrative process to take those special assessments and put them on the tax roll. And there's costs associated with that. So that interest rate goes to help pay some of those administrative costs. And our goal is not to be a bank. Our goal is not to make money. Our goal is to be fair in making those charges to the residents, again, as if we're extending kind of a quasi loan to make that installment plan up. There's a cost of money over a period of time. We all recognize that. That's why we get savings interest rates, and that's why when we take out a mortgage on our house, we have to pay the bank back an interest charge. Yeah, I certainly understand your comment and appreciate your comment and concern, but that's the practice we've been doing to help cover our costs in the billing and administration of special assessments.
And by eliminating the special assessments, then we don't have to answer that question anymore, too. So, thanks. These are awesome questions, and by my count, you got 3 more.
2, actually.
Oh, okay.
And this one is personal to me. In the course of them doing my street, we're like, oh, cool, they're doing our street. And I saw the CIP. I remember looking back at it to see how I missed that. They widened our street by a full 16 feet. And that had cost us, right?
No. What street was it, by the way?
Wisconsin.
Okay. I don't think we increased the width of the street by 16 feet.
That section, I'm pretty sure. 8 feet on each side.
I don't think we have enough right-of-way to do that.
$5.
But our special assessment policy for residential has a maximum width that we assess of 32 feet. So if we went from 32 to 1 million, you'd still be paying for 32 feet. So it doesn't matter.
I think we were at 28 feet.
So if that was correct, and I'll just assume that's correct because it's good for illustration purposes. If we went from 28 to 32, we would be charging you for the 32 feet. So each side of the street would have been paying for an extra 2 feet. And I know that we did increase the width slightly out there because we expect that eventually that'll be it's being treated like a collector street.
Yeah, right.
So I thought it went to 36.
From 28?
Yeah, so I think it was only 6. That's why I wasn't going to take your money, but yeah, but
Somebody told me it was 8 feet on each side, but
no, not even close.
When you see the CIP, you're not out there with your measuring tape, seeing what it was,
Yeah.
seeing what they're doing, or you would have heard from the neighborhood much more than you did, and finally we were
Yeah.
like, what the heck? And then we were told that we could park on both sides, and that turned out not to be true. I mean, all sorts of kind of things got snowballed in it. But I think in the CIP, when they write that up, they should say the street will be 36 feet formerly at. I mean, it would be more transparent if you said this is a this or that change. So we have a clue it's coming. It's almost like you slid that one through, and we didn't have time to voice our opinions or object to it or anything. And we know where the street runway now to make up for Jackson. I mean, we get that.
Thank you for that comment. Some very good points. Thank you.
Okay, the last one is, can the city approve, and you might have said this, and it might have flew over my head, can the city council approve part of this plan and not all of it? Can they pull sections?
I can tell you that this option was not specifically presented to council. We gave them about a dozen options, and they actually took a little bit of some of the other options we put together and created a 13th option. So can the council do anything they want? They can choose any policy option they want.
So you could be back to the whole drawing board.
And part of the frustration, I think, is we've been talking about this for 10 years. 5 years ago, and it was actually Russ's first meeting, is when the council said no to a transportation utility fee. And there are a variety of reasons that people were opposed to it, and that's in the past, but the council could look at it. But what I would say, and what I've said to council, is that if you're going to make a change, commit to a change. Going back and forth would be just devastating. I've seen communities do it. It's extremely divisive. They'd be better off doing nothing and maintaining a status quo that people are dissatisfied with than whipsawing back and forth from one option to the next, because then you talk about fairness, it becomes an even bigger problem.
Just to follow up on that, so just to help understand the process that the city council has gone through, each year we do what's called a capital improvement plan. We look, and you've mentioned it, we have that on the website, and we have projects laid out for the next 10 years. And one of the options we looked at is, why do you even do this? Why? There are some communities that don't have special assessments altogether, and they roll that into their general obligation debt. Well, in looking at our long-term financial position of the city and looking at what would happen if we had to issue debt, an additional $3.75 million a year more in debt, our debt ratio would not be going down, it would be going up in a different direction. The 7 elected officials at this time said that we don't like that option. So come up with a plan that we can eliminate assessments, but not put it all on to all the taxpayers. Have some other alternative revenue solutions. We've talked a lot about caps and ceilings and floors, and not extending the assessments for a longer period of time. We looked at, like Mark said, about 12 different options. This is the one that council said, go out to the public, tell them what we're planning on doing, explain it, get feedback, and then through that process of adopting legislation, they'll take that into consideration. So to answer your question, yeah, they can look at any number of different options. This is the one that will be presented that I strongly believe has support of all 7 members. When we made this similar presentation to the Chamber of Commerce, there was a lot of people that just said, leave the process alone. Leave assessments the way they are. Actually, no change has a cost to it, but I'm not sure that is the most beneficial for people that are faced with really large assessments on properties that a lot of people have put all of their life savings in, and especially if they've held their homes for a number of years, and then all of a sudden we come in and do this assessment, and we've seen people come before council during public hearings on special assessment projects just in tears because of how much this is going to impact their lives.
Do you have any idea how many people actually moved or foreclosed based on that? Probably not.
We don't have statistics, but I've heard people that because of that decided to move or sell their house, yes.
Well, guys got behind me at foreclosed, and I wondered, that was like in the 90s, and I didn't know if that was.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, but Russ raised a point that I think is important to point out, that of the different options, one of the things we looked at is more than a lot of other communities, Oshkosh has a lot of non-taxable property. And I'm not talking about churches, although churches are exempt, but every community has churches. But we have churches, but we also have the 3rd largest university in the state. We have a state prison. We have Wisconsin Resource Center. We have DNR regional offices. We have more state tax exempt owned properties. If we shifted it all to property taxes, you as a property tax payer would actually be paying a greater proportion of that street than you currently are. So there's imperfections in every approach, and I think council wrestled with that and said, this is one where we think balances it out, because businesses aren't paying for, businesses with large vehicles aren't paying the vehicle registration fee, but they do pay utility fees, and businesses pay, just full disclosure so you know this, they pay a greater share of the stormwater fee than you or I do as individual property owners. It varies from, each one has its relative benefit and drawback. And so this is a way to try to balance it all out. So I know there's a gentleman over here who's been very patient while Russ and I have been droning on, so please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for that. I wanted to thank you, though, also. You did answer many of the questions that I had noted throughout the process, so thank you for developing the frequently asked questions as you have. More on that, though, looking out to the future, you talked about the overall cost, and this is the estimate. Obviously, you have to make certain assumptions in order to get to that number. But looking forward at the obvious potential cost increases in the future, who would own that authority then in the future to those cost increases? So we're at 35 right now. We're on the higher end of the local area. Is that in 10 years from now, we go, oh my goodness, inflation has peaked at 8% for the past 8 years, and we need to just pulling out numbers. How would that work out?
Sure. The way the governance works is, in order to implement the vehicle registration fee or to make adjustments to the vehicle registration fee, it has to be a legislative action by the city council. It would be a majority of the 7 people that sit up here that everybody's elected to represent them. It's an ordinance, so any ordinance amendment would require 2 readings at a minimum. So that process is in there. In addition, each year we review our capital improvement plan. We review the budgets, not only the general fund budgets, but also our utility budgets. So if we have to make adjustments on the amount of money coming from the utilities, or if we have to make adjustments to the vehicle registration fee, that would be done as part of the budget process. And that's a resolution that gets adopted by the city council. Or if it's a vehicle registration fee, that is an ordinance change, and that would have to have 2 readings with the city council. The budget process, if you're not familiar, we are required to hold a public hearing. The last couple of years, our public hearing at the budget has been even more sparsely attended than this meeting tonight, even though we try, and our Oshkosh media folks do a great job at reaching out through social media and through other forms of advertisement and notices, and we do the formal public notices. Last year at budget time, we had 0 people show up at budget. But we do a staff process, then we have in the past, it's been 2-day workshop with the city council members to review the budget, answer questions. We have a formal public hearing at the city council level, and then they adopt by resolution. So to answer your question with a long-winded answer to make it short, it's a legislative action, and it would require, the vehicle registration fee amendment would require an ordinance. Any budget amendment change would be through the budget process.
And one of the things we've tried to do is try to at least keep this static for a few years and then review it at that time. Council could change it. I wouldn't recommend changing back to, as I said earlier, changing back to special assessments, but is there some new idea on fundraising for this? We could consider that. But yeah, it's something we're gonna have to keep an eye on, and it's a valid question, and it remains to be seen by what the 7 council would be and what the city manager and finance director ultimately would recommend to the council as well. But if we do this, I think we're going to be talking about how do we adjust the fee if we need to raise more money. It's a fair question.
That was perfect. With just a quick follow-on to that, as we look at the wonderful explanation on the how do we settle on the $35 and where that falls, obviously, a portion of it is a percentage, which is very easy to follow as the percentages increase, right? Follows, it tracks. The flat line fee of $35, is there an assumption then kind of looking forward to that projection of how much of a buffer or assumption we're good? Are we, based upon your assumptions, we good for 5 years, 10 years?
Before Russ gives you the technical financial answer, which you'll get
Yes.
10 minutes of, one of the things we want to know first is how accurate that vehicle count is. Because they said officially it's 46,772, and that's the official answer. Some of you may know that before I was here, I was in the town of Grand Chute, which is adjacent to Appleton. When Appleton did their vehicle registration fee, the town of Grand Chute told their residents, look at that vehicle registration card. And there were a lot of people who, even though they lived in the town of Grand Chute, they thought they lived in the city of Appleton until they had to pay a vehicle registration fee. It very well could be that people in the town of Oshkosh or town of Algoma may say, well, I'm going to correct this, and they haven't worried about it because there's nothing to worry about. You might laugh, oh, it says I'm in the city of Oshkosh, ha. Or some people actually think they're still in the city of Oshkosh. I'm not sure how many vehicles we're going to lose when that count comes in. We've factored that in. We've wanted to have it big enough. If the loss isn't that great, then we got a little more cushion for future years. 10 years, I would say that's probably pushing it. 3 to 5 is probably somewhere where we're looking. Russ, is that fair?
Very fair. Again, not only the number of vehicles, but if you're a mathematician and you take $35 towards the 46,772, the number is actually 1.6 million, and we're looking for 1.5. So we're about just under $100,000 short of that kind of rounding effect. So we are building in the assumption that the number of vehicles may go down, but we're also hoping that will last into the future, 3 to 5 years or so, to take a look at it. But we'll have to look at this each year on an annual basis.
All right. First of all, thank you for the lady for asking about that 0% special assessment about the city. So I have a follow-up question, which is, I'm all about the new funding because I know how it feels like to be slapped by $10,000 special assessment. Now, since the project is done in Lincoln, which is where I live, I'm not going to benefit it from this. But as a person who's already choosing the 10 years installment, can the city let, for example, if I sold my house, to keep the installment in the property so that I don't have to pay, because I feel like I won't be benefiting by selling my house and moving into another area. Like, why would I have to pay for the remaining of the installment? That's my first thing. And then second of all, for the special assessment, I feel if you're going to use the fund, I'm all about the road, fixing the road, but the sidewalk should stay with the property owner. For example, I live near downtown. I would never take my dog walk to the west side of town. I would never walk in that neighborhood sidewalk. So why the money that I pay for registration pay for someone else's sidewalk? So that's my two questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for those questions.
First of all, don't move. We don't want to lose people, but I'll let Russ answer the rest of it.
The technical side of things is the city doesn't force you to prepay those assessments when you sell your property. What ends up happening in the real estate market is those obligations, they want those obligations cleared before the new buyer buys your property. And it's through that closing process where, they prorate property taxes when you buy a property during the year, and that's to try to level things out. Same thing with special assessments. If you found a buyer that was willing to assume that responsibility, from a city perspective, we wouldn't care, but normally the buyer wants a clear title to their property, and they don't want having any encumbrances on the property when they buy the property. So that's why the real estate transaction folks will probably more than likely want to try to clear that up. Your comments about the sidewalks are a great comment. When we looked at this process, we looked at our cost of streets, but as we mentioned in the presentation, there is a lot of labor-intensive process to going with inspection, marking, repairing, billing, and collection. It's a really labor-intensive process. So we heard from folks loud and clear. And as a matter of fact, the last time the vehicle transportation utility was created, that was one of the sticking points was, whether sidewalks were in or out. That could change. We're thinking that we have enough funding to cover sidewalks. Yeah, it hasn't been fair, but we try to do sidewalks on a 10-year cycle. Because you got sidewalks repaired 3 years ago, you might be up for another repair in 7 years on that property. So we're hoping to do that as part of the, create enough funding to also take care of that program.
I have a question regarding the CIP. I think you were saying that you're planning years in advance. Well, what we had on East Lincoln is they came and sprayed the sidewalk, and then they replaced the sidewalk, and within a year's time, they redid the street. So I paid $300 and something, I believe, to have a patch for less than a year. And then I got the special assessment for $10,000. And why wouldn't I be reimbursed that $375? Because I think the city knew what they were doing at the time they came around and sprayed the sidewalks. Why didn't they just leave it for 6 months more or whatever it was? I guess that's my question.
Yeah,
Well, you should have been credited with that, and if you weren't, you can certainly bring that to our attention, because we don't, while it looks inevitable, there's no guarantee. So when we have a one program that does the sidewalks on a 10-year cycle, Lincoln was planned, but that could always change. We've changed it sometimes at the end and saying, no, some other project usually has something to do with a sewer situation where we redo a street. We may have ended up not doing Lincoln, so we replaced the sidewalk because of the liability it presents. So, but since we did do exactly as you described, we should have credited you for the remaining life of the sidewalk, which was 9 years. So you should have been credited. And if you want to go take a look at your special assessment estimate, I think you can sit down and talk to our public works folks, because you should be credited for 9 years on that.
But you don't really see an item.
Oh, hang on for the microphone. That's okay. We can hear you fine.
See, I never saw an itemized list either. I had the same problem. They went and whited out the sidewalks on Wisconsin that they marked with their little green markers. And then they went and they erased them.
Yeah.
But they didn't do Nevada. And Nevada, sidewalks got replaced. And guess what? They tore those all up. But I don't see any itemization anywhere of which things I'm paying for.
There should have been in your estimate, because in both of your cases, you haven't gotten the final bill yet, and we take a whole year to give you the final bill.
That'll be on that.
It should be on that, and if it's not, then you can call Public Works, but you should get credited for 9 years. Oh, the gentleman's left. You should get credited for 9 years, and same with your, on Wisconsin, you should get credited 9 years.
More that going on then, you probably know.
Yeah, and again, and I've seen situations where we're doing your street next year, and then another street over here, the sewer collapses, and we have to change projects, and then if we didn't do your sidewalk, so I will acknowledge that there's a little bit of wastefulness to that, but once we tear up the street, we got to tear up the sidewalk. We try to minimize that, but for those that they fall in that 10-year cycle, we generally want to replace them, because it becomes a liability and a hazard, and we have to replace it, and if we didn't do it, then we'd have to come back and do it again anyway, and so that's just one of those things that we, as a precaution. But that's a great question. A little more on the special assessment side, but again, if we get rid of the special assessments, you're not going to see that. You won't see the cost. You still might see that situation you described, but you wouldn't be charged for it. And you should only be charged once. So look at your bills and make sure. The lady in the front? Not quite. It's kind of like church. Nobody wants to sit in the front row, but somebody is in the first row of people. So thank you for
Thank you.
coming up close.
So I just want to clarify that 3.75 number was derived based on past expenses in years?
No, it's a projection of what we believe would be what we need to collect this year in 2024.
Well, actually, in working with the Public Works Director, it's a combination. It was looking at history, but it's also looking at projections. And so it's on average is on an annual basis, we'll need $3.75 or have had assessments of about $3.75 million on average over the last number of years.
And as the gentleman's question suggested, we want to make sure we have a bit of a cushion so that that we have enough to give ourselves time to see how it's going and how we're collecting.
Okay, was there any discussion on trimming or tightening the budget while you're coming up with this number?
Absolutely. We do that all the time. But the fact of the matter, and I tried to explain it early on in the presentation, for whatever reasons, some of it's supply chain, some of it's labor costs, some of it's materials cost. If you have had the opportunity to pour concrete recently, concrete prices have gone up much more higher than the cost of living and the CPI. Every construction project we do, we bid it out. We only do the projects we think we have to address. As a matter of fact, I think, in looking at it, there's probably a greater need for some streets to be replaced than what we're getting to. So we take into consideration not only the road condition, the pavement condition, but also the condition of the utilities underground. And we kind of hinted around this topic, but one of the most frustrating things from a finance director's perspective is when you spend the money to resurface a street and 2 years later, either the water main or the sewer has a failure and you have to cut into a new street. That's that's very disappointing to have that happen. So it's not the budget of the entire government, it's the budget dealing with road reconstruction and road construction projects, and those are all bid out.
So that cost includes things like snow removal, leaf removal too, right?
No, not at all. No, that's a
So there's no way to, or there wasn't a conversation about what services could we cut to pour more money into the road projects and less financial ask from the people?
That's probably an annual thing that's done with every budget. We have our operating budget and our capital budget are looked at independent of one another, but then at the end, the finance director and I have to make a recommendation to the council, and so we do look at those things. But am I specifically looking at, if I cut leaf pickup, can I do more streets? It's a balancing act of the whole package. We take a look at what we can do from a property tax standpoint, which is obviously the one that people care about the most. But we take a look at it on a more global basis when we do those things. But we take a look at all of those things. But snow removal, we can cut snow removal, and then we decide when we're going to roll out the snowplow trucks. The cost of salt is a fixed cost. We don't get to, we take a low bid that's done by the state, so we do those types of things. So leaf pickup, some of that's mandated, so I can't just arbitrarily cut it. I have to meet certain minimum requirements. I always look for ways to more efficiently do it, and we've done things like that to get more efficient vehicles. Time of day we do street sweeping. So we look at all those things with keeping our tax rate down in mind, and as we're looking at this is how do we get our borrowing down, because our borrowing, getting ourselves down into the 40% of our limit was something that was very important to us, because we know that the more we borrow, the more you have to pay for it in your property tax bill, because that's what pays for debt, is your property taxes. So we're constantly looking at that.
So
But
is there a way to be more transparent about the options you have looked at instead of waiting for the annual budget discussion every year? Because I mean, I look at this number and this is a big number, and I see what the city is asking of its residents, but I don't see how the city is trying to decrease the cost and make it as less painful process. And it just feels like there's not a lot of transparency there.
I would disagree with you just slightly. And as Russ pointed out, at our annual budget meeting, not a single person from the public showed up. The fact that you guys are here tonight, I salute you, and I appreciate that. And I would encourage you to come back at the first Wednesday in November this year, when their public hearing on the budget takes place. We have budget meetings with the city council. We have all-day budget meetings with the council that are broadcast live on Oshkosh Media, and you can watch it. We publish the budget. One's available at the library. So transparency, I'm a little sensitive to it because I take efforts, but it's somewhat disappointing when no one shows up, because while I don't want anybody to, I prefer people not to yell at me. When you say nothing, that's almost as disappointing as people coming and complaining. I would much rather have you here talking to us and sharing your frustrations, and then giving us an opportunity to talk about those things. But I can tell you that the council very seriously takes a look at the costs. And as city manager, I aggressively work at the state level to try to get the state to fund more of our operations, because we are too reliant on property taxes. And if you think your property taxes are too high, I have one thing to say to you. I totally agree. I absolutely agree. We don't get a sales tax in Wisconsin for cities. They just gave that right to Milwaukee. And I think us telling you more of the story about how we're funded is something that I'm always looking for better ways to do it. So I take your comments as a challenge, not as any, I didn't sense any offensive nature in your comments. I think you're just like, hey, I'm paying these taxes. Help me, give me a break. And I think the council hears that, and they hear it. They go to the grocery stores, people see them. I go to the grocery store, I hear from people, and we have an obligation to do exactly what you're saying, and I want to thank you. There was something in your question, though. You said this cost. Are you referring to the assessments, or are you referring to the $35?
3.7 million, just like the overall cost. So it sounds like the community discussion based around that number has to wait till November. Is that what you're saying?
No, the 3.7 is, like I said earlier, is a combination of some of the historical numbers of previous assessments, and then also a future look. It's not operating costs. I mean, we tend to borrow about $18 million a year for projects. So the 3.75 is a portion, or is somewhat related to the total cost of street reconstruction and utility reconstruction in our community. And it's amazing when you look at, and we talked about this at not only the staff level, but with the city council, when we did Algoma that went through the university, and the chancellor was at our chamber presentation and pointed out to the business community, the university paid a special assessment. But the point I was trying to get to is the cost of doing 1 mile of street. If you figure in the concrete, the water, the sewer, the replacement, all that stuff, it's about $1 million to replace a mile of street.
$10 million.
$10 million.
$10 million.
I'm sorry.
For the
I
whole
forgot a
thing.
zero.
Yeah, you forgot a zero. Well, you corrected me earlier, too. It's $10 million a mile, and that's bid out. So how can we be more efficient, or how can we make that cost less? we would do less. So, and one of the overwhelming comments we get from our citizen survey is we need to do more roads, not less. So the $3.75 million that we're trying to raise through special assessments is, we do that every year. I mean, that's just this year's amount. And we think it'll be good for a few years, but the idea is that we collect that, but then we borrow for the rest. And then that's also put as a burden on you as an individual taxpayer.
We hear you. We do.
And sounds like you got some other questions, so let's
I do. I'm
help
trying
you
to
out.
process what you just said, though, because I don't exactly agree, especially being a business owner, that just because you have less doesn't mean you do less. I think there's ways to get creative, but it sounds like we all need to wait till the budget meeting and really offer suggestions then as to numbers. But that's okay.
If you're talking about operating costs of the city, yes.
Okay.
If you're talking about street reconstruction, that's just based on what we feel we can afford to do, as Mark just mentioned, and spreading that out. Again, trying to look at the condition of the streets, but the utility, as well as the utilities, and trying to take into account what the community can afford to do on each year. And there are certain people that would love to do twice as many streets each year than what we're doing. It's just a matter of how big of a burden we want to put on the residents.
Okay. My other question is, in the beginning you talked about the need to change special assessment is partly due to inflation. So I was just wondering what the projected fee increase is going to be with inflation over the next years, because we see this number now, and you said $35 vehicle fee. Well, what is that going to be? I think that's part of the community's frustration, is there's no clarity on what's the max range. Is it going to go up every year? I think you answered a question before saying that it'll be reviewed yearly. But I guess, what is the projected inflation rate that you see with these fees?
If I could project the inflation rates into the future, I guarantee you I would be in a different seat today than what I am right now. We all have ideas of where the economy is going. And some people argue whether, we're on an upward trend or on a stable trend or declining trend. But that process is so hard to predict. I think we're trying to be responsible in estimating what we're going to need without, again, holding a lot of money in reserve. So it's a balancing act, and it's a hard act. And like the city manager said earlier, this is not the perfect solution, but it is a solution that kind of takes into account a couple different factors.
And I'm going to ask Scott if you could put up, I went back to that slide. Again, we can't predict the future, but we can tell you what's happened in the past. And from 2008 to 2023, a 15-year period, those costs went up about 150%. So, and that's the cost of the assessment. We're trying to replace the assessment. Is it going to go up 150% over the next 15 years? Maybe, but we have to keep an eye on that. As the cost of construction increases, and you can see the increase from 08 to 13 didn't really do much, and that was in the aftermath of the Great Recession, so everybody was being much more competitive, and it was just cheaper. With supply chain issues that we talked about between 2018 and 2023, the inflation rate on construction just went through the roof. And I could geek you out on the details, but Portland cement, which is really what makes concrete, the costs have doubled on Portland cement. So it's those types of things that keep going up that we That's why we competitively bid those things. It's law, but it's also, we competitively bid that to keep those costs down, and we look for ways. I would say I salute our public works folks. One of the things we do to try to keep things less expensive is we make sure that we go out to bid at this time of year. So we're bidding out these projects like right now. In fact, didn't we do some in December even? Mm-hmm. We did that because at this time of year, the contractors are hungrier because they don't have their work lined up. So we get more competitive bids by doing it at this time of year. If we waited until May, where they're loaded up for the summer, it's going to cost us even more. So we do little things like that we don't always tell the story about, and the council's talked to me about this. Like, you need to tell the stories about the things we're doing to help keep the costs down. So that's what we're trying to do.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Can I just
So-
interject one real quick
Sure.
point? And I think we talked about it before, but it's not just the cost of inflation. It's, what these assessments are doing for homes, whether it's 60-foot frontage or 80-foot frontage, whatever. When you're being assessed $3,000 for a street reconstruction project, that's one thing. When it starts getting $7,000, and if you add utilities, you're talking about a $10,000 assessment. For some of our homes in this central part of the city are less than $200,000. It's just maybe over $100,000, and you're talking a $20,000 assessment. That's 1/5 of the cost of the value of your house, and that's the story that's really getting to the attention of the city council members is the burden that's placing. I mean, it's one thing if that's an assessment on a newer home in probably a more affluent part of the community, but when we start doing stuff in the central city with older homes, smaller homes that are not that expensive, you put the ratio of how much that assessment is to the value of the property, it's astronomical. Sorry, I didn't mean to interject.
You have more questions, so let's listen to you.
So for the residents, there's no projection about what the increase will be. So as residents, it makes me very nervous, and to hear that there's no cap. Essentially, we could go up to say a $100 vehicle fee. I mean, at one. So that's just where my concern as a resident comes is you can predict the cost of projects for the next year, but there's no answer on the cost for us in future years. So that's
But
just
nor
where
can I give you an answer on what would happen with special assessments. And I can only show you what we've done the last few years. Inflation over the last couple of years, whether it's capital projects or just what you and I pay for groceries and things like that, we can't predict that. Our goal is to keep the number down, but I'm not going to lie to you tonight and say, you'll never see an increase. The gentleman said, so you'll hold it for 10. I won't make that promise. The idea is that I think we can hold it for about 3 years, maybe go a little farther, and then the council will look at it. But and I'm just going to read straight from the frequently asked questions. City staff will review the VRF amount and the utility contributions on a regular basis to determine if projects are being funded on a sufficient basis. If they're being funded on a sufficient basis, we don't need to change the amount. If they're not being funded sufficiently, we have to go to council, and then council has to go through a whole public hearing process and go through this process. The council asked me to do this because they wanted to hear. So, yeah, it's I can't guarantee you, but at the same time, I can't guarantee what would happen if we keep the status quo either.
Mark, could I just add additional comment to that? Because when we were talking about all the different alternative processes that we were considering, and again, this was discussed with the current city council members, one of the things, and we actually had a gentleman come up to one of the city council meetings and just say, why don't you just cap the assessments where they're at now and, and have the city absorb the difference? Again, then that means we have to borrow more money, which means we'll add more to the taxes of the general public over that period of time. That is an alternative, but it was an alternative that we didn't think was the most prudent financially to look at. So we came up with a scenario where we have a couple different funding sources to help level off the playing field. So it's not all vehicle registration, it's not all utilities, it's not, there's still some assessments for some of the lateral work, utility work. So we're trying to come up with a solution that, lessens the impact, but yet still be responsible. Thanks so much for your questions.
Yeah.
And those were great comments too, and things to think about. What's that?
We call it the buffet.
The buffet.
This
We all
was
need a
great.
buffet.
And, while I think we're probably just in the interest of time and out of respect for all of you, we'll call an end to the public information meeting, but I'm more than happy to hang around because I really appreciate, this group wasn't big, but these questions were incredible and calls into question a lot of stuff, and we certainly need to hear these types of things. So I want to thank all of you for taking time. You didn't have to come tonight, you chose to come tonight, and I want to tell you I appreciate that. And I know the council members will watch this, or they've already watched it, and I'm sure they're going to take a lot of these comments into consideration. You've given us a lot to work with tonight, so I want to thank you. And please, keep watching and paying attention to everything going on. The council's going to have what's called a first reading on February 13th, but that's no action. Their action is anticipated to be on Tuesday, February 27th at the regular council meeting at 6 p.m. So you can just keep that on your radar. Go ahead.
One more quick comment, Scott. If you could put up the URL and then that email address one more time. For those that are here or those that are listening, please submit your comments to vrfcomments@oshkoshwi.gov. Those comments will get to City Council. We want your questions or comments, even if you want to send them after tonight, or if you have friends or relatives or neighbors that couldn't participate tonight. We have two more opportunities, but we wanted to make sure that people had the ability to send comments at their convenience to these things. So send your comments in, look at the frequently asked questions. They will be updated depending on questions we get. So what you see today might get updated. I think we have on the bottom when it's last updated, and I think the last update was today. So we're still evolving on these frequently asked questions to try to get as much information out to everybody before that decision's made.
Great. Thanks for coming, everybody.